what would you do? If the person in front of you trembled with fear, not because you were a bad person, but because life had taught them to trust no one anymore. In the remote Montana wilderness of the late 19th century, as a night storm swept across the prairie, seemingly intent on erasing all human traces, a young woman named Eliza Moore stopped her horse before a solitary log cabin. Her clothes were soaking wet, her breath was ragged, and behind her, her past refused to let go. The door swung open. A man stood there, Sam Carter, a taciturn Western cowboy, his gaze as stern as the land he lived in. Eliza whispered almost inaudibly, I'm afraid of you." There were no hurried words of reassurance. No probing questions. The cowboy simply stepped back, raised his gun, and uttered a sentence that changed the fate of both men. "Then I will earn your trust. If it were you, would you close the door to protect yourself, or open it and accept that kindness always comes with risks?" This isn't a story about love at first sight. It's a journey of trust built on action, of a woman once considered possession, and a man who understands that true kindness means knowing when to step back. If you've ever been afraid of people, if you've ever wished someone would give you a choice, then stay with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to join us on this healing story where love doesn't come like magic but like a small lamp in the midst of a storm. The rain poured down on the Montana grasslands as if the sky had been torn apart. The wind lashed across the prairie, carrying the smell of damp earth and the heavy rumble of thunder rolling across the horizon. The brown horse panted, its hooves slipping on the soft mud, but it pressed forward as if it understood that stopping meant the end. Eliza Moore hunched over the saddle. Her soaking wet cloak clung to her back, her hair was disheveled, whipping against her face, tasting salty with both rain and tears. She didn't look back. She didn't dare. There are fears where even a single turn of the head is enough to make your heart stop. The thunder rumbled directly overhead. Eliza yanked the reins. The horse neighed in panic, but she didn't scream. She didn't cry. Her fear had long since overcome the sound, transforming into a chilling silence that clung to her chest. She knew only one thing: she had to keep going. There was no plan, no clear destination. Only survival instinct guided her, an instinct that women like her are often not allowed to listen to until it's too late. A flash of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the muddy path ahead. In that brief moment of brilliance, Eliza saw her hands trembling. Her thin, pale fingers clung tightly to the reins as if they were the only thing connecting her to life. "Go," she whispered, unsure whether she was speaking to the horse or to herself. The wind howled again, more fiercely. And along with the wind, a voice echoed in her head, not loud, not a shout, but cruelly familiar. "You owe me obedience." Eliza closed her eyes tightly. The memory didn't come like a noisy nightmare, but quietly, heavily, like a stone placed on her chest. The wooden room was dark. The oil lamp flickered. There was the strong smell of alcohol and the sound of chairs being dragged across the floor. The voice was the same, calm, firm, as if speaking of a monetary debt, not a person's fate. "I raised you. I fed you. I gave you a roof over your head. You owe me." Another clap of thunder brought Eliza back to reality. She took a deep breath, her throat burning. No, she owed no one anything. No one is born to be a debt to another. But fear doesn't disappear just because people want it to. The rain lashed harder. The road ahead blurred, merging into the darkness and the streaks of water. Eliza didn't know how long she'd been riding, an hour or a lifetime. Time and the stormy night became meaningless. Only her pounding heart and the relentless feeling of being hunted remained. She heard the sound of horse hooves in her imagination, or perhaps it was real. Eliza wasn't sure. Fear made every sound seem suspicious. She tilted her ear to listen, but the rain swallowed it all. Then, amidst the endless darkness of the wilderness, she saw a glimmer of light. Very small, very weak, but it is real light. An oil lamp. Eliza squinted. The light wasn't still. It flickered in the wind, appearing and disappearing as if it could go out at any moment. But it was enough to make her heart tighten, not with joy but with apprehension. In the middle of a stormy night in the desert, a house with lights on offers hope, but it could also be another trap. The horse slowed, snorting. Eliza pulled on the reins, stopping a few dozen paces from the wooden house. She looked around. There was nothing but wet grass, darkness, and the sound of rain. The house stood there alone, old as if it had existed before she was born and would remain long after she was gone. Eliza swallowed hard. If she knocked, she was putting her life in the hands of a stranger. If she turned away, she wasn't sure she'd have the strength to keep running. A biting wind swept through. Eliza shivered. In that moment she realized that what she feared most wasn't death. It was being pulled back to where she had lost her voice, her choice, her very being. She dismounted. Her feet touched the ground, soft and cold. Eliza walked slowly towards the house, her heart pounding so hard she feared the people inside might hear it. She stood on the porch. The oil lamp's light shone through the small window, illuminating her raised hand, hesitating in mid-air. Another clap of thunder rang out so close that the ground shook slightly. Eliza knocked on the door. Not strong, not weak, just strong enough to say, "I'm alive. And I need to be safe." She took a step back, her back against the rain-soaked porch pillar. Time dragged on, cruelly, slowly. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then there were footsteps inside. Eliza held her breath. The old wooden door creaked open. A warm yet wary yellow light shone onto the porch. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered by wind and time. He said nothing immediately. He simply looked at her from her soaking wet hair and panicked eyes to her empty, unarmed hands. His gaze wasn't fierce, but it wasn't lenient either. Eliza opened her mouth, but no words came out. All the prepared words vanished. She just stood there trembling, not knowing whether from the cold or from the fear of misplaced trust. The man finally spoke, his voice low and slow, as if each word had been carefully considered. "Are you hurt?" The question, simple, neither curious nor probing, stunned Eliza. She shook her head very slightly. He looked at her for a little longer. Then his gaze shifted to the horse, its head bowed wearily behind him. The rain continued to fall. But at that doorway Eliza felt for the first time that night something recoiling, not fear but an urge to flee. And it was in that fragile moment, as the oil lamp flickered in the wind and rain, that her fate began to take a different path. Slow, cautious, but one that had never existed before. Eliza didn't know who the man was, but amidst the still falling rain she understood she had just crossed the line between fleeing and hoping, though that hope remained as fragile as the lamp flickering in the wind. The oil lamp stood there in the middle of the wilderness like a whisper. Not dazzling, not proud, just a tiny speck of gold trembling in the wind, and rain enough to be seen and enough to arouse suspicion. Eliza Moore stood motionless on the porch, her hands still cold from the rain and from her own fear. The wooden door before her was open, but the distance between the threshold and safety remained invisible, fragile, and fraught with risk. The house wasn't large. Just one story, the wood faded, the roof low as if it had deliberately bowed to the meadow wind for years. No fence, no extra lights, no sign of affluence. A place adequate to live in and nothing more. Eliza looked inside. An oil lamp sat on an old wooden table, its surface chipped by time. An armchair, a fireplace built of rough stone, the cool ashes of a previous burning still clinging to it. Nothing suggested immediate danger, but neither did anything promise absolute protection. That's what made her heart beat faster. If this place was too good, she would have been suspicious. If it were too bad, she would have run away. But it was somewhere in between, just like her life right now. The man remained standing in the doorway, neither stepping out nor rushing to invite her in. He gave Eliza space. It wasn't coldness, but a kind of quiet respect so rare that Eliza didn't immediately recognize it, only feeling it was different from everything she had ever known. The wind blew across the porch. Eliza shivered, her shoulders instinctively tensing. The man observed this detail closely. He didn't ask any further questions. He simply stepped aside, leaving just enough space for her to enter if she wished, and it was also just enough for her to turn her back if necessary. Eliza stood there for a long time. Not because she had never made difficult decisions before, but because this was the first time the decision was truly hers. She thought about the road ahead, muddy, dark, and an unnamed fear that clung to her. She thought about continuing to ride in the rain until she was completely exhausted, until she either escaped or was dragged back. Then she thought of this light, a stranger, a home without promises, a choice not forced. Eliza took a deep breath. Not to gather courage, but to listen to herself. Finally, she stepped through the doorway. There was no dramatic slamming of the door. The man simply closed the door gently, slowly latching the wooden bolt just enough to keep the wind out, but without creating a feeling of confinement. Eliza stood inside the house, unsure where to put her hands. She felt the warmth from the old fireplace, not strong but real. The warmth spread through her wet clothes, touching her skin, which was numb from the cold rain. The man hung his wet robe on the hook, then hung Eliza's robe next to it without asking, without touching her. Everything happened naturally, as if he were accustomed to caring without intruding. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair near the fireplace. His voice was low, even, and not commanding. Eliza sat down. She placed her hands on her lap, maintaining distance. The man pulled up another chair and sat opposite her, but not too close. There was enough space between them for Eliza to breathe. Outside, the rain continued to fall. But the sound of the rain now seemed more distant, muffled by the thick old wooden walls. Eliza realized she was beginning to hear other sounds, the crackling of wood due to dampness, the soft crackling of the fire as more fuel was added. The house has its own rhythm of life, a slow, steady, unhurried rhythm. Eliza looked around again. There were no guns laid out on the table. No scrutinizing gazes. The man moved the oil lamp a little further away so the light wouldn't shine directly into her face, a small gesture, but enough to show he didn't want to overwhelm her. "You can stay until the weather clears," he said. "Then you can go on your way if you wish." Eliza looked up. The statement didn't carry an invitation to stay longer, nor did it imply any conditions. It was simply an option presented, then left at that. She nodded. A very slight nod. In that moment, Eliza realized that what had made her decide to step inside wasn't because she immediately trusted this man, but because he didn't ask her to. For Eliza, trust had been demanded far too often. She sat there listening to the rain and the fire. Her body gradually stopped trembling. Not because she was no longer afraid, but because for the first time in hours, perhaps years, she didn't have to prepare to run. The man stood up, picked up an iron cup, and poured in hot water. He placed the cup on the table, gently pushed it towards her, then stepped back. Eliza watched the steam rising from the cup, hesitated for a second, then took it. The heat made her eyes sting. No questions. No interrogation. No blatant pity. Just an old house, an oil lamp, and a man experienced enough to understand that sometimes what people need most isn't words, but a place where they aren't asked why. Eliza took a sip of water. Her throat felt soothed. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. The image of the stormy road was still there in her mind, but now it seemed a step further away. Outside, the thunder was no longer raging as intensely as before. The storm was slowing down little by little, as if it too needed a rest. Eliza opened her eyes. The oil lamp still burned patiently without going out. And in that faint light she began to understand that the decision to knock on the door tonight wasn't the end of her escape, but the first comma of something else. Eliza didn't know the man's name nor how long he would maintain that distance, but in the thoughtful silence of the old wooden house, she sensed clearly that there are some people who don't need many questions because their silence speaks volumes. Sam Carter had lived alone on this land for nearly 10 years, long enough to learn to distinguish the sound of the wind from the sound of horse hooves, long enough to understand that not everyone who knocks on your door in the middle of the night needs help, and not everyone who needs help has the courage to knock. Therefore, when he opened the door and saw Eliza Moore standing there soaking wet and pale under the oil lamp, Sam didn't rush to conclusions. Nor did he rush to show compassion. Both were things to consider. Sam stood slightly leaning to one side, one foot firmly planted on the wooden floor, a posture of someone accustomed to defense rather than attack. His eyes weren't sharp but deep, the gaze of someone who had seen enough to no longer trust appearances. He didn't ask her who she was. Sam knew that question often led people to lie, or to say more than necessary. Instead, he asked about something more important. "Are you hurt?" Eliza shook her head. A small, almost unconscious movement. Sam noticed her hands. They trembled, but not the kind of trembling someone is hiding something. It was the trembling of someone who had been cold for longer than their body could tolerate. Sam didn't invite her in right away. He learned that a door once opened is not just for people to enter, it's also for trouble, the past, and sometimes violence. Sam needed to make sure he was opening the door to people, not to disaster. He observed very carefully. Eliza stood upright, though her shoulders ached. She didn't glance around, searching for an escape route, nor did she scrutinize the house like someone with ulterior motives. Her eyes were weary but not shifty. When the wind picked up, she shivered, a bodily reflex, not an act. Sam saw it. And in that moment he remembered a night long ago. One night he stood on someone else's porch, younger, more naive, believing that if he remained silent enough, the pain would pass on its own. That night the door didn't open. Sam didn't repeat other people's mistakes, but neither did he let kindness override sound judgment. He opened the door a little wider. "Come in," he said, "but you should stand near the door." Not an order, just a boundary. Eliza entered slowly. Sam closed the door behind her but didn't immediately bolt it. He wanted her to know she wasn't locked inside. Trust, Sam understood, couldn't be built on the feeling of being imprisoned. He hung his gun on a high wooden hook near the ceiling, a deliberate, obvious, undisguised gesture. Eliza saw it, and for the first time since entering the house, her breath hitched. Sam said nothing about the act. Men who boast about their kindness usually talk a lot. Sam wasn't that kind of person. He pulled a chair closer to the fireplace, but didn't sit in it. Instead, he pushed the chair toward Eliza. "Sit down. You're cold." Eliza hesitated, then sat down. Sam stepped back, keeping his distance. He stood, leaning against the table, arms crossed, observing. He watched how she placed her feet close together, how she didn't take up much space, signs of someone accustomed to a reserved lifestyle, not someone who wanted to dominate. Sam went out onto the porch. The rain had lessened, but the wind was still biting. He pulled Eliza's horse under the shelter and carefully tied it up. The animal panted, tired but docile. Sam patted its neck gently without saying a word. Animals, he knew, often understood humans better than we thought. When Sam returned, Eliza was still sitting there. She didn't stand up, rummage around, or ask any questions. She just waited, a waiting that demanded nothing. Sam added more wood to the fireplace. The fire flared up, spreading a warm light throughout the room. He hung up his wet coat, then pointed to the empty hook beside it. "Hang your coat up there. Don't catch a cold." Eliza followed suit. Her movements were slow and careful, as if she were afraid of breaking something fragile. Sam sat down in the chair opposite but didn't lean back. He maintained a ready posture, not to attack but to defend if necessary. A long time passed in silence. Sam didn't break it. He knew there were people who, when asked too many questions, would shrink back. And there were people who, when not asked anything, would open up on their own when they were ready. Eliza looked at him, then down at her hands. I won't be staying long," she said. Her voice was hoarse and low. Sam nodded. "It's up to you to decide how long you stay." That answer made Eliza look up. Not surprised. Rather, it was as if she were confirming something deep within her heart. Sam stood up and took 2 iron cups. He poured hot water into them, placing one in front of Eliza and the other in front of himself. He drank first, a small but deliberate gesture. He wanted her to know that there was nothing to fear from water. Eliza held the cup. The warmth eased, the numbness in her fingers. She took a small sip, then another. Sam observed, then asked a second question that night. "Do you want me to call anyone?" Eliza shook her head immediately. Too fast. Sam didn't ask why. He nodded, accepting the answer as it was. Outside, the wind had died down. The storm had passed without the noise it had made when it arrived. Sam listened, as was his old habit. The moor had its own voice, and tonight it was calming down. Eliza set the cup down, her hands no longer trembling as much as before. She looked at Sam for a long time. "He didn't ask me anything," she said, more as a comment than a question. Sam shrugged slightly. "If she wants to talk, she'll talk. What if not? She still needs to be safe." That statement wasn't emphasized. It was laid down like a stone, just heavy enough to keep the door from being blown open. Eliza bowed her head. In that moment, a drop of water fell onto her hand. It was unclear whether it was water from her hair or a tear. Sam didn't stare. He turned away, adjusting the wood in the stove. He gave her space so she wouldn't be embarrassed by her feelings. For Sam Carter, kindness wasn't about embracing another's pain. Kindness was about standing close but not encroaching. And it was in that old wooden house between 2 strangers that a rare form of trust began to take shape. Not noisy, not hurried, but enduring, like the very land they stood on. Eliza hadn't revealed anything about her past, and Sam hadn't promised anything for the future, but in the way he set clear boundaries and respected her choices, Eliza gradually understood that there are men who protect others not with strength but with restraint. Sam Carter stood up first. It wasn't because he was bothered by the silence, but because he understood that there were moments when, if the man continued to sit still, his presence would become a burden, though he had no intention of doing so. He walked to the corner of the room where the rifle still leaned against the wall, a weapon intrinsically linked to life on the frontier, to hunting, to self-defense, to situations where the law hadn't yet reached. Sam picked up the rifle unhurriedly without concealment. Eliza watched his every move, her body tensing slightly in reflex. Sam realized that. He raised the gun high, hanging it on a wooden hook, driven into the ceiling beam, higher than anyone standing in the room could reach. He did it slowly enough for Eliza to see that this wasn't an impulsive act, but a conscious choice. Then he turned back, his hands empty. He said nothing. Eliza didn't ask, but she felt an invisible string in her heart loosen. Sam pulled the wooden chair next to the fireplace, the warmest chair in the house, and pushed it toward Eliza. He wasn't keeping it for himself, nor was he being overly generous. He was simply offering his seat. "Sit closer to the fire," he said. "It's still cold tonight." Eliza hesitated for a breath, then complied. As she sat down, the warmth from the fireplace seeped through her thick dress, penetrating to her very bones. It wasn't a luxurious feeling. It was simply the feeling of survival. Sam stepped back, choosing a seat further away where the firelight only partially reached him. He didn't need the warmest. He just needed enough. Outside, the rain was falling lightly again. Not violent, but persistent, as if the storm didn't want to leave completely. Sam glanced at the window, then at Eliza. Her hair was still wet, a few strands clinging to her collar. "The horses need to be more carefully covered," he said, as if talking to himself. Sam put his coat back on, opened the door, and stepped outside. Eliza looked up instinctively, wanting to say something, but it was too late. The door closed behind him. The house was left with only her, the fireplace, and the gentle patter of rain on the wooden roof. For the first time that night, Eliza was alone. Without fear. She looked around. Nothing had changed. Nothing had been taken away. Sam had left the house, leaving her space a silent but clear reassurance. Outside on the porch, Sam bent down to tie the reins for his horse. The rain soaked his shoulders, but he wasn't in a hurry. He gently stroked the animal's nose, whispering a few reassuring words. His hands were calloused and steady, the hands of a laborer, not a possessor. Sam didn't do it to prove anything. He did it because it was the right thing to do. When he returned, Eliza was still sitting in the same spot. She hadn't moved closer, nor had she recoiled. Sam noticed the subtle shift. A new kind of balance was forming. He closed the door, hung up his wet cloak, then stood straight and looked at Eliza. "You're here for your safety," Sam said. His voice was low and slow, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Not for anything else." The statement is short. It needs no explanation. But it sets a clear boundary, like a line drawn on the ground, not to divide, but to protect both sides. Eliza looked at him. The firelight reflected in her eyes. For a moment she wanted to cry, not out of fear, but out of relief. For years she had become accustomed to the fact that all safety came with conditions. A meal accompanied by silence. A roof over her head accompanied by obedience. But here, safety is just safety. "Thank you," Eliza said. Her words were soft but sincere. Sam nodded. He didn't respond with flowery words. He turned to the fireplace, adjusting the half-burned log. He left the thank you where it belonged, nothing more, nothing less. Time passed slowly. Eliza sat there, feeling the warmth gradually spread through her. She was no longer shivering as before. She took off her scarf and neatly placed it to the side. These small movements did not escape Sam's notice, but he made no comment. Belief, he knew, cannot be forced. It's like fire, it must be nurtured steadily, not yanked. Eliza spoke again very softly. "Do you live here alone?" Sam looked at the fire. "Yes." No further details. No expansion of the story. "But it's not completely closed either. A small door is left ajar." Eliza nodded. She didn't ask why. There are questions that, if asked too soon, will hurt more than they heal. Outside, the rain began to subside. The wind calmed down. The wooden house creaked softly as the wood expanded with the warmth. These ordinary, simple sounds created a sense of security that Eliza had forgotten existed. Sam poured more hot water, placed the cup near Eliza, then stepped back. He always maintained that habit, bringing something, then withdrawing. as if he understood that the most precious thing he could offer her at this moment was not intimacy but her right to be untouched. Eliza watched him. In the flickering firelight, Sam's face became clearer, the wrinkles around his eyes, the faint scar on his chin, the marks of a difficult life. But in all of that, Eliza saw no demanding nature. She noticed the restraint, and it was that restraint that made her believe. Not immediately. Not entirely. But enough to stay another night. Enough to lie down on the small bed near the wall, listen to the fire burning, and let my body rest without being on guard. Sam sat back down at the table, preparing a few things for the morning, a habit of someone accustomed to living alone. He no longer looked at Eliza, but he listened, as her breathing gradually became steady. Outside, the storm has passed, and in a small log cabin in the Montana wilderness, two strangers are learning to trust each other by not crossing each other's boundaries. Eliza drifted off to sleep for the first time in years without being forced, but Sam understood that the darkness didn't disappear just because there was firelight. Sometimes it waited until people closed their eyes to return in the form of nightmares. Eliza's sleep was not deep. It felt more like a temporary pause than true peace, a state of suspension where the body relaxes but the mind remains alert, like a bird hesitant to fully fold its wings when landing on a branch. The fire in the fireplace had died down, leaving only a faint glow of glowing embers. The wooden house was bathed in a dim light, just enough to distinguish darkness from reality. Sam Carter still sat at the table, his back to Eliza, his hands adjusting some old envelopes, a habit that helped him stay awake during long nights. Eliza lay on her side, her face turned to the wall. Her breathing was initially steady, then gradually became more rapid, as if something were pulling her away from her fragile comfort. A whisper escaped her lips. Very faint, very quiet. But Sam heard it. "Do not." He lifted his head, not in a hurry to stand up. Sam was used to such sounds, the sounds of memories creeping into sleep, often coming when one thinks they are safest. Eliza stirred. She clutched the thin blanket tightly with both hands. Her forehead was dotted with sweat, even though the night had grown colder. "No, please don't." Her voice cracked. Then more clearly, more painfully, "Mom. Mom." That name, it wasn't an ordinary call. It carried the primal fear of a child left alone in the darkness. Sam rose, but he didn't approach immediately. He stopped a few steps from the bed, maintaining the distance he had initially set. "Eliza," Sam called, his voice low and even. "You're dreaming." "Eliza is unconscious." She shook her head, tears streaming down her temples and soaking into the pillow. Her breathing was rapid and ragged, as if she were being pulled back to a place she had fled with her life. Sam didn't touch her. He didn't put his hand on their shoulder. He didn't shake them. He knew that some people, when touched in a panic, would feel like they were being attacked again. "Eliza," he called again, a little louder, but still at a slow pace. "You're in Montana. It's getting light now." A simple statement without flowery words. No empty, comforting platitudes. Just the truth, the very thing that anchors people to the present. Eliza was startled. She sat up abruptly, her eyes wide with panic. She looked around, her hands raised as if to shield herself from something invisible. It took her a few seconds to recognize the log cabin, the fireplace, the faint firelight, and Sam standing there a distance away, his arms hanging down, not approaching. She was breathing heavily. Then, as if all her strength had been drained away, Eliza bowed her head, her shoulders trembling in silence. Sam didn't rush to say anything. He pulled up a chair and sat down a comfortable distance from the bed. He didn't stare at her. He looked at the fire so that Eliza wouldn't feel scrutinized in her moment of vulnerability. A very long time passed. Eliza spoke first. Her voice was hoarse, as if her throat had been scraped by sand. "I'm sorry." Sam shook his head slightly. "There's nothing to apologize for." She looked up, her eyes still shattered. "I woke him up." "I haven't slept tonight," Sam replied. A simple fact. No reproach. Eliza nodded, as if accepting the answer. She wiped her face, took several deep breaths, and tried to regain her composure. "It was just a dream," she said, but her voice was uncertain, as if she herself couldn't believe what she had just said. Sam looked at the fire, then said slowly, "Dreams often carry things we try to forget during the day." Eliza remained silent. Outside, the wind had completely died down. The night was so quiet that the crackling of the firewood could be heard clearly. The small house seemed to be holding back the breath of the two people inside. Eliza clutched the blanket tightly. "If they find me," she said very softly. They'll drag me back. Like an object. The words fell into the room like a heavy stone. Sam didn't react immediately. He didn't ask who they are nor why. He let the statement remain, as it was an incomplete truth but painful enough not to be explored further at this moment. "You're not an object," Sam said after a moment. His voice was low but firm. "Nobody is an object." Eliza smiled very faintly, a smile devoid of joy. "There are people who think differently," she replied. Sam didn't argue. He'd lived long enough to know that some false beliefs are held firmly in place by systems, not by reason. "You don't need to say anything more," he said. "Not tonight." Eliza looked up at him. In the firelight, Sam's face appeared calm, neither curious nor insistent. Just a man willing to sit there, listen to half the story, and accept that the other half wasn't yet ready. Eliza nodded. She pulled the blanket tighter but didn't lie down immediately. She sat there, her back against the wall, her eyes gazing into the distance. "My mother," she said, as if talking to herself. "She used to say that people aren't born to belong to anyone." Sam listened but didn't interrupt. "She's gone," Eliza continued. Her voice was more even but empty. "After that, everything changed." She said nothing more. No need. Sam got up, poured some warm water, and placed the cup on the small stool near the bed, still keeping his distance. He didn't hand it to her directly. "Drink this," he said. "It will help you fall back asleep." Eliza picked up the cup. Her hands were no longer trembling as violently as before. She took small sips, then set the cup down. "I won't bother you any more," she said. I'm fine." Sam nodded. "If you need anything, just call." He returned to the table, sat down, his back turned to her once again, a gesture indicating that tonight she was not being watched, not being guarded. Eliza lay down. This time sleep came more slowly but more genuinely. The images in her head were still there, but they no longer swirled violently. She heard Sam's steady breathing, the dying embers of the fire, and knew she wasn't alone in the darkness. Sam sat there for a very long time. He didn't speculate about Eliza's past. He didn't concoct a story in his head. He had learned that the truth, if forced, would shrink and distort. He knew only one thing for sure: the woman sleeping in his house carried a fear great enough to run through the stormy night. And that fear was not something that could be erased by one safe night. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten. A pale gray light seeped through the window crack. A new day was coming, not promising to be easy, but at least it was coming. Sam got up and rekindled the fire. The night is over. But Eliza's story is not. Sam didn't ask any further questions that morning because he understood that when the sun rose, there were people who needed to be given choices, not promises to decide for themselves the path they would take. Morning arrives very slowly. Not the glorious sunrise often described in stories told with rosy memories, but a pale, quiet, gray morning, still smelling of damp earth and the ashes of the previous night's storm. A low mist hung over the Montana meadows, making everything seem as if it were wrapped in a thin veil, gentle yet concealing much. Sam Carter woke up before sunrise. It had been his habit for many years, formed not out of diligence but because life on the border didn't allow for sleeping too long. He rekindled the fire, boiled water, and moved slowly so as not to wake Eliza too soon. There are sleeps that once you've just reached them, you need to hold on to a little longer, especially for those who haven't slept in safety for too long. Eliza woke up as the faint light filtered through the window. She wasn't startled, not panicked. She simply opened her eyes and lay still for a few breaths, listening to the house. The gentle sound of burning wood, the bubbling of boiling water, the familiar low footsteps. An ordinary morning. That alone was enough to make her heart ache. How long had it been since she'd had a morning that didn't begin with fear? Eliza sat up, straightening the thin blanket as if wanting to restore order to the space that had sheltered her all night. She stepped out, standing near the window, looking out at the wasteland. The storm had passed. Only puddles of water remained on the grass, reflecting the faint light of the new day. Sam placed 2 metal cups on the table. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice low and even. Eliza nodded. "Yes, thank you." Sam didn't respond verbally. He simply pulled up a chair, sat down, keeping the distance between them the same, neither closer nor farther. He took a sip of hot water, then looked toward the door where the path leading east was gradually becoming visible through the mist. "I'm going to Redwood Crossing this morning," Sam said, as if talking about the weather. Eliza looked up. The name Redwood Crossing sounded to her not as a specific place, but as a concept. A town. A community. A place with laws, people, and boundaries clearer than this wasteland. It's not far, Sam continued. If we leave early, we'll be there before noon. Eliza remained silent. She looked at the glass of water in her hand where the warmth was gradually dissipating into the cold air. Sam put the glass down. If you'd like to come along, he said slowly, I'll wait. I'm not going to take you. You shouldn't go. It's just, if you want to. Eliza looked up and met Sam's gaze. He wasn't looking at her expectantly, nor was he questioning. His eyes were like the road outside, open but not inviting anyone to step onto it. Otherwise, Sam continued as if to complete the sentence, I'll still give directions. Those words fell into the wooden house as lightly as ashes, but to Eliza they weighed more heavily than any promise she had ever heard. No conditions. No strings attached. No reciprocity required. Eliza was used to offers always coming with a price. Where she came from, there were no free lunches, no homes that didn't demand silence, and no protection that didn't turn into control. Here, Sam Carter presents a choice, then steps back. I need to think, Eliza said. Sam nodded. She has time. He got up, put on his coat, and went outside to tend to the horses. Not to put pressure on her, but to give Eliza real space to make her decision. Eliza stayed in the house alone. She walked to the door, watching Sam's figure on the porch. He bent down, checking the horseshoes, tightening the saddle ropes. Every movement was familiar, unhurried. He prepared for the journey as if he had done it 100 times before, and as if this journey held no special significance. But for Eliza, it meant a great deal. Redwood Crossing, a place where she could find protection, but also a place of people, papers, and questions. A place where the past could catch up to her without horses or stormy nights. She could also choose not to go. She could stay another day. Or she could turn in a different direction, continue to run away, continue to live in a state of being undiscovered and unprotected. Eliza placed her hand on her chest. Her heartbeat was steady but deep. It wasn't as frantic as it had been last night. She recalled her mother's words spoken one afternoon long ago when the two of them stood on the porch of their old house. People are only truly free when they are given choices, and those choices are respected. Eliza took a deep breath. When Sam went back inside, she was already waiting. I'll go, Eliza said. Her voice didn't tremble. If you don't mind. Sam looked at her and nodded. Okay. No smile. No obvious relief. Just simple acceptance, exactly as he had made the offer. He prepared 2 portions of dried rations and placed them on the table. Eat something before you go. They ate in silence. But it wasn't a heavy silence. It was more like a wordless agreement between 2 people who understood that the path ahead needed to be begun with steady, unhurried steps. As she left the log cabin, Eliza turned back for one last look. The morning light shone on the old wooden roof, making the place seem strangely ordinary. Not a magical refuge. Just a place that had fulfilled its purpose, keeping safe those who needed to be safe. Sam locked the door and put the key in his pocket. They mounted their horses and rode side by side, maintaining a safe distance. The path leading east wound through the dew-covered meadows. No one spoke much. There was only the steady sound of hooves, the creaking of the leather saddles, and the fresh air of a new day. After a while, Sam said, Redwood Crossing isn't big, but there are good people there. Eliza nodded. I don't need much. Sam looked straight ahead. Usually that's enough. They continued walking. The sun rose higher, dispelling the fog. The path became clearer little by little. Eliza felt something changing within her, not overwhelming joy, but a sense of steadfastness. She's no longer just running away. She's moving forward. Sam didn't ask her what she would do when they arrived. He didn't promise to stay. He just walked alongside her just as he had said he would, waiting if she wanted, showing her the way if needed. And for Eliza, that was enough to convince her that no matter where the road ahead led her, she would no longer walk in fear of being forced into it. They rode in the morning light without grand promises, without stories of the past, only the long road ahead where faith doesn't come from a single moment but is built mile by mile, shared in silence. The road to Redwood Crossing is not straight. It meandered through low, grassy slopes, followed a dry stream bed in the summer, then crossed open spaces where the wind blew freely without any barriers. To the unfamiliar, it was a path easy to get lost on. But to Sam Carter, it was as familiar as a palm line. Every bend, every dry tree trunk held a unique memory. They rode their horses slowly. It wasn't because the road was difficult, but because neither of them was in a hurry. Sam maintained a steady pace so that Eliza's horse wouldn't be rushed. He rode slightly ahead, close enough that if anything happened he would be the first to react, but far enough away so Eliza wouldn't feel hounded. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of fresh grass and damp earth after the rain. The sky opened up to a pale blue, not vibrant but enduring. White clouds drifted slowly as if accompanying them. For the entire journey no one spoke. The rhythmic sound of horses' hooves tapping on the drier ground. That sound, repeated over and over, had a strange effect. It calmed the human mind like the ticking of an old clock in a familiar house. Eliza sensed it. She sat upright in the saddle, her hands gripping the reins more firmly than they had that morning. Not out of fear, but because she was beginning to be present in the moment, no longer living in memories or worrying about the future. Sam was the first to break the silence. "I deliver mail," he said, his voice even as if he were talking about the weather. Eliza turned to look at him. "Delivering a letter," Sam nodded. "For this area. Redwood Crossing, the farms around there. Some people only get one letter a month." Eliza pictured it: isolated houses in the wilderness, people living off the land, and the weather, waiting for news from their children who had gone far away. The thought weighed heavily on her heart. "Has anyone been waiting long?" she asked. Sam shrugged slightly. "Some people wait their whole lives." He didn't say it pessimistically, just as an accepted fact. "But they still wait." Sam continued, "Because letters are a way to know they haven't been forgotten." Eliza was silent. She thought of her mother. She thought of the afternoons they would sit by the old window waiting for familiar footsteps. That house once had been a safe haven before it was no longer. Sam continued without looking at Eliza, as if to allow her to listen without having to react immediately. "There's an old man who lives near the edge of the forest," he said. "His son went to work on the railroad 10 years ago. Letters became less frequent, then stopped altogether. But every time I visit he still comes out and stands on his porch." Eliza swallowed hard. "Does he still have hope?" Sam nodded. "Not exactly hope. It's habit." He paused for a moment, then added, "There are people who don't need to believe that good things will happen. They just need to believe that their waiting is worthwhile." Eliza listened to every word. She felt that the statement touched a very deep part of her, the place where she had once waited for her mother to return as she used to be, even though she knew it was impossible. "And then there's the old woman in the Southern Valley," Sam continued. "Her husband died young. Her daughter married and moved far away. She reads each letter very slowly. After reading it, she carefully folds it and puts it in a wooden box." Eliza whispered, "Did she answer?" "Yes," Sam replied. "She writes regularly, even though her hand shakes." They rode their horses across a low mound. Ahead, the road widened. In the distance, a few small houses began to appear, the first sign of Redwood Crossing. Eliza took a deep breath. "He carries so many stories," she said. "Isn't that too much of a burden?" Sam thought for a moment. "It's heavy, but it's the kind of weight that helps me stand firm." Eliza nodded. She understood. After a while, she was the one who spoke up. "My mother," Eliza said, her eyes fixed straight ahead. "She used to say that home isn't the most beautiful place, but the place where you don't have to be afraid." Sam didn't turn around. He listened. "Our old house wasn't big," Eliza continued, "but every evening my mother would light the lamps early. It was as if she wanted me to know that, wherever I was, there was light waiting for me." Her voice was slow but not broken. Not a lament, just a memory placed in its proper place. Later, Eliza continued, "When things changed, I realized I had carried that image with me longer than I thought." Sam nodded, as if he had understood from the start. "The lights," he said. "Many people spend their whole lives just trying to keep them from going out." Eliza turned to look at him. In the midday light, Sam's face was clearer, not the face of a hero, but that of a man who had chosen to live a decent life day after day without needing anyone to witness it. The path gradually sloped downwards. They slowed down. Redwood Crossing was now very close. They could hear the wind lashing against the rooftops, the distant sound of hammers striking. Eliza felt a fleeting sense of unease. Not fear of Sam, not fear of the town. Rather the anxiety of one journey coming to an end and another being forced to begin. Sam seemed to sense it. He said very softly, "We don't need to get there right away." Eliza smiled faintly. "I know." They continued on their way. No one urged their horses forward. No one mentioned what would happen after they reached the town. Both understood that trust wasn't built on promises for the future but on how people treated each other in the present. And along that path, amidst the small stories and long silences, Eliza realized she had begun to trust Sam Carter not because he had saved her but because he had never taken anything from her. That belief didn't flare up. It spread slowly like the midday sun on a dew-covered meadow, not blinding but enough to warm. They had traveled far enough for memories to begin to fade. But the road ahead wasn't always still. And just when Eliza thought she was safe, a small mark on the ground began to remind her that the past sometimes found a way back. They stopped near a low bend in the road where the dirt road was softer because the rainwater from the previous night had not yet completely drained away. Sam dismounted first. He always had that habit, not out of politeness but out of caution. The seemingly most harmless stretches of road are often where the most secrets are revealed if one bothers to look closely. Eliza dismounted as well. She didn't ask why Sam had stopped. She simply stood still, holding the reins, allowing the horse to rest. A gentle midday breeze blew, carrying the scent of damp earth and trampled weeds. Then Eliza saw it. Horse hoof prints. It's not theirs. She realized it almost immediately, not from experience but from intuition. The imprints on the ground were still quite clear, sharp-edged, not yet blurred by wind or other footsteps. They ran parallel to the path they had taken, then merged again at this bend. Eliza felt her throat dry up. "Sam." She called, her voice low. Sam had seen it before. He squatted down, placing his hand on the ground, not touching the hoof prints, measuring the distance only by eye. He showed no sign of haste. There was no startled reaction or instinct to draw a weapon. He was simply a man reading the ground as if reading a familiar page of a book. "At least 2 horses," Sam said. "Maybe 3. Eliza tightened her grip on the reins. "They are following us." Sam didn't answer immediately. He observed more closely the direction, the depth of the footprints, the distance between the steps. Then he stood up, brushed the dirt off his hands, his gaze still calm. "They weren't in a hurry," he said. "They were just following." That statement, in a way, is even more terrifying. Eliza looked back along the path they had just traveled. The wasteland stretched out so quiet it was almost innocent. Not a soul in sight. No movement. But it was precisely that emptiness that made her feel so exposed. "Maybe they're just going the same way," Eliza said, as if to reassure herself. Sam nodded slightly. Maybe. But he wasn't entirely convinced. He looked at Eliza. Not scrutinizing. Not forcing. Just a direct, clear gaze, the kind of look experienced men use when they need to ask a question that isn't easy to hear. "They came because of you?" Sam asked, his voice low. "Or because of what you brought with you?" The question fell between them, not heavy but sharp. Eliza stood still for a long time. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hand loosened the reins, then tightened its grip. A gentle breeze blew, causing her dress to flutter, but Eliza remained motionless like a statue. She said, then stopped. Sam didn't rush her. He turned and gently patted the horse's neck as if giving her more time. "There are things," Eliza continued, her voice slow, "that aren't in your pockets or luggage." Sam nodded. "I understand." Eliza took a deep breath. "But there are also things, if they fall into someone else's hands, they won't want me to go." Sam looked at her more closely now. Not to doubt her, but to understand the extent of the danger she carried, whether material or factual. "You don't need to elaborate," Sam said. "Just tell the truth." Eliza looked up. Her eyes no longer showed the panic they had before, only weariness and determination. "They won't stop," she said. "It's not that easy." Sam nodded. "Then we shouldn't stay long either." He looked around, reassessing the wind direction and the terrain. Then he pointed toward a narrow path that veered off the main road, where the grass was taller, the soil drier, and the tracks would be harder to follow. "We'll take a detour," Sam said. "Not faster, just different." Eliza asked no further questions. She mounted her horse and followed Sam off the main road. Her horse hesitated briefly, but then followed. The sound of hooves was now softer, blending into the grass. They were going slower than before. It wasn't out of fear, but because Sam understood that running too fast would leave a more obvious trail. He chose to walk like those who have nothing to hide, calm, steady, but always observant. Eliza watched Sam from behind. She realized that what made her trust him wasn't that he was stronger than the pursuers, but that he wasn't panicking. Fear, Eliza had learned, often causes people to reveal themselves before others have a chance to do so. They passed a low, rocky area, then a shallow stream. Sam led the horse into the water for a short distance, then climbed back onto the bank at a different spot. No great trick, just small, repeated choices enough to obscure the footprints. Eliza saw it all and remembered it. For the first time in years, she's not just being protected, she's learning how to protect herself. After a long silence, Eliza spoke. "If they find me." Sam turned his head and looked at her. "We'll know before they get close enough." "And what if they come?" Eliza asked. Sam didn't answer immediately. He looked ahead where the rooftops of Redwood Crossing were now more clearly visible. Then he said, "Everything will have to be called by its proper name." Eliza understood what that meant. No more hiding. No more running. No more living in the shadows of silence. A feeling of both fear and relief washed over her. They stopped on a high mound. Sam dismounted and looked back at the trail they had just left. The initial hoof prints were now harder to distinguish. The grass and water had done their job. "We have time," Sam said. "But not much." Eliza nodded. She looked toward the town. Redwood Crossing was no longer a vague concept. It was a real place with real people and with real consequences. Sam mounted his horse. Before continuing on, he added more as a confirmation than a reassurance. "Whatever their motives," he said, "she's no longer running alone." Eliza swallowed hard. She didn't reply verbally, but as she rode alongside Sam, her shoulders straightened. Her gaze was no longer fixed on the distance behind her. The road ahead is still long, and behind the traces haven't completely disappeared. But it was in that moment that Eliza understood that the question Sam had just asked wasn't just about the pursuers, it was about how willing she was to face her own truth. They continued on, knowing that the wide road would not be safe much longer, and when Sam saw the low mountains ahead, he understood that sometimes to protect what is right, people must choose the narrowest path. Sam Carter stopped his horse abruptly. "It's not because you see something clearly ahead, but because you sense something behind you." Someone who has lived long enough in uncharted lands learns to trust that feeling, something that comes before sound. He tilted his head and listened. The wind had changed direction. No longer blowing from the valley upwards, it now swept down the mountainside, carrying the scent of damp rocks and something else. The smell of horse sweat. Not theirs. Sam didn't turn back immediately. He simply gestured for Eliza to slow down. "Dismount," he said softly. "Make no noise." Eliza followed without question. Her heart pounded, but her mind was unusually clear. She was no longer the panicked person she had been that stormy night. She was learning to listen. From where they stood, a narrow gorge opened up to their left. Not a path, just a stretch of rock carved deep by rainwater and wind over the years. The gorge was no wider than 2 horse lengths, steeply descending, jagged and darker than the path they had just traveled. Sam quickly surveyed the terrain. Then he made a decision. "Follow me," he said, "but you go first." Eliza looked up surprised. "And you?" Sam didn't elaborate. "I'll stay behind." That statement wasn't epic. It was simply the most logical arrangement, and Eliza understood that immediately. She nodded. They led the horses down the ravine. The first steps were slow and difficult. The rocks were slippery with moss and rainwater. Eliza felt her hands sweat as she held the reins. Her horse snorted hesitant, but then followed. A small stone rolled down, hitting the cliff face and creating a dry, echoing sound. Eliza held her breath. From above, I heard voices. It's unclear. Not close, but enough to know they are no longer alone. "Slow down," Sam whispered from behind. "Don't look up." Eliza followed suit. She watched the horse's back each step she took. She could clearly feel Sam's breathing behind her, steady, firm, unhurried. That kept her steady. They ventured deeper into the gorge. The light dimmed. The air grew colder. The mingled smells of damp earth and rocks made everything feel so real, so close. Suddenly, Eliza's horse slipped. A sharp, loud noise. Eliza let out a very soft cry, almost a forced breath. The horse wobbled, nearly falling. Sam immediately grabbed the reins from behind, pulling hard to regain balance for both man and horse. "Calm down," he said, his voice low but firm. "You did a good job." Eliza swallowed hard. She nodded, even though she knew Sam couldn't see. She continued walking. From above, the voice called down. "Is it down there?" A man's voice. Not angry, not shouting, but it carried the certainty of someone accustomed to giving orders. Eliza felt her heart tighten. Sam stopped. He gestured for Eliza to continue descending even more slowly. When she was a few steps behind him, Sam turned back and looked up towards the top of the gorge. He didn't answer. He just stood there silent like a piece of stone. The voice called out again, closer this time. Sam raised his hand, signaling Eliza to stop at a narrow, rocky alcove. He stepped onto a higher stone step, completely blocking the way down. If they looked down, they would see him first. And that's exactly what Sam wanted. A figure appeared at the mouth of the ravine. Then another. Then another. 3 men, horses behind them, their eyes scrutinizing, more accustomed to pursuit than conversation. "My friend," the leader said, "we're looking for someone." Sam didn't move. He kept his feet firmly planted on the rocks, his arms hanging loosely at his sides, not near the gun, not making any excuses. "This area is vast," Sam replied. "You'll need to be more specific." The other man chuckled softly. "A girl. Traveling alone. She could come with you." Eliza heard every word. She stood still in the darkness, her heart pounding, but her mind was strangely clear. This was no longer a nightmare. This was reality. Sam tilted his head. "Many people pass through this area." "She's one of our family members," the other person continued. "She's lost." Sam looked him straight in the eye. "I don't see anyone lost." A long silence followed. The wind howled through the mountain pass, creating a low, mournful sound. One of the horses above stamped its foot in frustration. "You don't need to get involved in this," the man said, lowering his voice. "We just want to get what belongs to us back." That statement sent a shiver down Eliza's spine. Sam didn't turn to look at her, but he spoke very clearly. "In this land, people are not objects." His voice wasn't loud, but in the narrow gorge it resonated firmly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. The man above narrowed his eyes. "Are you sure?" Sam didn't answer. He took a step forward, blocking the entire path. Not a challenge. Just a refusal to yield. No one drew a gun. No one lunged. There was only a thick, oppressive tension in the air where every decision could have irreversible consequences. Finally, the man spat on the ground. "We'll meet again," he said. "Sooner or later." Sam nodded. "Maybe." They turned their horses around and retreated from the mouth of the gorge. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, blending into the wind. Sam stood still for a long time, listening until he was sure they had gone far enough. Then he turned around. Eliza looked at him, tears streaming down her face without her realizing it. Not from fear, but because for the first time in her life someone was standing between her and those who called her property. "Let's go," Sam said more softly. "Before dark." They continued down the ravine, then circled around behind the rocky ridge where a small path led straight to Redwood Crossing. The setting sun began to cast a golden hue, illuminating the mountainside in long streaks of light. Eliza walked beside Sam. This time the distance between them was a little closer. She didn't say thank you. She knew Sam didn't need it. In that silence something changed, not loudly, not explosively, but deeply enough for Eliza to understand that from now on, she wouldn't just be running away to survive. She is running away in order to live a meaningful life. As they emerged from the ravine and the last rays of daylight illuminated the path ahead, Eliza understood that the time had come when simply hiding was no longer an option, for there were truths that if left unsaid would forever remain. Shackles. They stopped as the sun began to set behind the mountains. It wasn't because they were tired, but because they both understood that after what had just happened, neither could continue as if nothing had changed. The patch of ground where they stood was slightly higher than the road, high enough to see Redwood Crossing lying still in the distance, small wooden houses, the main road running straight ahead, the bluish smoke beginning to rise from a few chimneys. A place with people, a place with laws, a place where the truth once spoken cannot be pushed back into the shadows. Sam dismounted first, tying the reins to a low tree. He did everything as usual, carefully, slowly, not letting any lingering tension control his actions. Eliza dismounted as well, but she didn't immediately tie her horse. She stood still, her hands on the saddle, gazing toward the town. The setting sun cast a pale yellow hue over the landscape. A gentle breeze blew. There was no longer any trace of her pursuers, but their presence remained not out there but within Eliza's chest. Sam turned around and saw her standing there. "We can take a break," he said. "Nobody can keep up that fast." Eliza nodded but didn't turn to look at him immediately. It was a moment before she spoke, a low, slow voice as if each word had to be drawn up from a very deep place. They weren't lying, she said, in their own way. Sam didn't interrupt. He sat down on a flat rock nearby, took off his hat and set it aside. This wasn't a gesture of comfort, but rather a desire to listen with full attention. The man at the head of that group, Eliza continued, is my stepfather's business partner. She paused. She took a deep breath. Then she continued, he wants to buy me. The words fell into the quiet space, neither echoing nor reverberating. But they weighed so heavily on Eliza that she had to place her hand on her chest as if to make sure she could still breathe. Sam didn't react immediately. Not a sigh, not a curse, not a gesture of anger, just silence. A deep, thoughtful silence, the silence of a man who understands that saying the wrong thing could shatter the courage he's just mustered. My stepfather, Eliza continued, her voice more even as if once she started she didn't want to stop, always said I was a burden, that I owed him for giving me food, for giving me shelter. She gave a faint smile. Does that sound familiar? Sam nodded slightly. I know him. Eliza Moore has nothing of value, she continued, as if repeating someone else's words, apart from the possibility of getting a good deal. The wind blew a little stronger. Sam raised his hand to hold his hat down, but his eyes remained fixed on Eliza. My mother didn't agree, Eliza said, her voice dropping. She argued with him. Many times. She turned to look at Sam. Then she got sick. Sam frowned slightly, not out of suspicion, but because he understood that what Eliza was about to say was not something to be taken lightly. It wasn't a normal illness, Eliza continued. She deteriorated very quickly. She became forgetful. Then she was bedridden. She clenched her fists. The doctor said it was a disease. But I saw it. Sam didn't ask what he saw. He waited. Eliza, bring me some water, she said, her voice suddenly distant as if lost in a memory. Every night. She closed her eyes. Then my mother died. No tears welled up. Only a large void opened up in her voice. Sam took a deep breath but didn't interrupt. He let Eliza keep control of her own story. I found the letters later, Eliza said. My mother wrote them. In her final days. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small package carefully tied with old cloth. The package wasn't large, but the way Eliza held it made Sam understand that this was the most precious thing she carried with her. She wrote for me, Eliza said, and for the whole town. Sam looked up. The town, Eliza nodded. She wrote about what happened, about the agreement, about how my stepfather coerced me. She looked at Sam, her eyes not pleading, only weary. She wrote that if I ever reach a place where there is law, I must give these letters to the right person. Sam stared at the package for a long time. In that moment, he no longer saw Eliza as a woman on the run. He saw her as someone carrying evidence not only of her own pain but of the silence of a mother who had failed to protect her child. Eliza, Sam said slowly, calling her by her name for the first time in this long conversation. You're not just running away. Eliza looked up. She's carrying the truth, Sam continued. And the truth always scares people. Eliza swallowed hard. I don't want revenge. Sam nodded. I know. I just don't want her to die in vain, Eliza said. Her voice cracked at the last word, but she didn't cry. And I don't want to be the bargaining chip they use. Sam stood up. He took a few steps, not approaching Eliza but standing parallel to her, looking towards Redwood Crossing. That town, he said, has police. It has a judge. It's not perfect, but it has laws. Eliza remained silent. Those letters, Sam continued, are the reason they're following her. Eliza nodded. I think so. And that's why Sam said they won't stop. She looked at him. So what should I do? Sam turned around and looked directly at her. His gaze offered no promise of ease, but it was genuine. You'll have to step up, he said. Not alone. Eliza sighed, trembling slightly. I'm scared. Sam nodded. Me too. That answer surprised Eliza. Not because Sam was afraid, but because he admitted it. And it was that admission that made fear no longer dominate. They stood there watching the sun slowly set behind the mountains. The light faded slowly, as if it didn't want to leave too quickly. Eliza put the package away this time with a different feeling. It was no longer a mere burden. It was a responsibility she had chosen to carry. Thank you, she said. Not because he saved her, but because he listened. Sam put his hat back on. We should get into town before dark. They mounted their horses and continued on their way. The distance between them was no longer one of caution but of mindful companionship. Redwood Crossing is right ahead, and with it comes an inevitable confrontation. Eliza had spoken her mind, and as the first lights of Redwood Crossing began to illuminate the twilight, they both understood that confrontations were unavoidable, not with guns, but by calling things by their proper names. Redwood Crossing becomes more clearly visible as the sun sets. It wasn't a big town, just a dusty government road lined with low wooden houses, a blacksmith shop, a general store, a post office, and a small church tucked away in the background. But for Eliza Moore, this place held a meaning far beyond its unassuming appearance. This is a place where there are witnesses, where words don't fade into the wind, where people are held accountable for what they call their own. Sam and Eliza slowed their horse as they approached the edge of town. Sam no longer rode ahead. He rode alongside Eliza, not shielding her with his body, but not leaving her to walk alone either. The villagers began to take notice. A man standing in front of the blacksmith shop looked up. A woman hanging clothes on the porch stopped what she was doing. No one said anything, but their eyes followed the two strangers with the familiar, cautious curiosity of small communities. Eliza felt the gaze. She took a deep breath, straightening her back. She didn't lower her head. She didn't flinch. This was what Sam had said. If you have to face it in the light. The sound of horse hooves behind them grew clearer. It's no longer a feeling. No longer a faint trace. This time, they've arrived. Sam heard first. He turned his head, his gaze unwavering. 3 men on horseback appeared at the end of the road, dust swirling behind their hooves. They weren't in a hurry. There was no need to rush. Their confidence stemmed from their habit of others getting out of their way. The lead rider pulled back and stopped a few steps from Sam and Eliza. He dismounted, removed his gloves, his gaze sweeping over Sam before settling on Eliza as if she weren't human but something whose ownership needed to be confirmed. "We found it," he said, his voice calm. Eliza felt a knot in her stomach. But she didn't back down. The man turned to Sam. "You don't need to meddle in other people's family affairs." Sam didn't answer immediately. He dismounted and stood between Eliza and the other group. No outstretched arms. No fanfare. Just standing in the right place. "That girl," the man continued, pointing at Eliza, "is our family's property." Some of the residents of Redwood Crossing paused. The word property echoed in the air like a strange, hard, sharp object not belonging here. Sam looked him straight in the eye. "In this land," Sam said, his voice low and clear, "people are not property." Not raising his voice. Not speaking harshly. But that statement was enough to make it impossible for anyone to pretend not to hear. The man gave a wry smile. "You don't understand our laws." Sam shook his head. "No. It's you guys who don't understand the laws here." A tense silence hung over the main street. Eliza could hear her own heartbeat. She could also hear the post office door open, the sound of footsteps slowing. People were beginning to approach, not necessarily to intervene, but to witness. The other man tilted his head. "She went with him," he said, "but that doesn't change the fact that she belongs to our family." Eliza took a step forward. She didn't wait for Sam to stop her. "No need. I don't belong to anyone," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't tremble. "And I choose to be here." The man turned to look at her, his eyes turning cold. "You have no choice." Sam turned to Eliza just for a very brief moment, enough to confirm that he was there. Then he turned back to face the other group. "At Redwood Crossing," Sam said, "everyone has the right to choose. If you think differently, you can tell the police." Hearing this, the man behind them spat on the ground. "We don't need the police." Sam nodded. "But this town does have it." As if in response, a middle-aged man emerged from the direction of the grocery store. On his chest was a small brass star, the sheriff of Redwood Crossing. He didn't run. He walked slowly, steadily, like someone accustomed to solving problems that couldn't be solved by haste. "What's going on?" the police chief asked. The other man turned and gave a polite smile. "A family matter." The police chief looked at Eliza, then at Sam, then at the other group of people. "Here," he said, "family matters don't include referring to other people as property." No one said anything more for a moment. Eliza felt her knees give way, but she stood firm, not because of strength, but because she was no longer standing alone. The man looked around. His gaze swept across the faces that were no longer indifferent. He understood what was happening. Not an immediate defeat, but a loss of the initiative. "We'll be back," he said in a familiar, threatening tone. Sam nodded. "Then you'll return as citizens." "Not as owners." The other group mounted their horses and turned to leave. The dust settled. The main road of Redwood Crossing returned to its usual slow pace, but not as it had been before. Eliza stood still, watching them until they were completely out of sight. She exhaled, trembling slightly. Sam turned to her. He didn't ask if she was all right. He knew that question wasn't necessary at this moment. The police chief approached. "Miss," he said to Eliza, his voice unhurried, "if you want to talk." "My office is over there." Eliza nodded. "I want to." Sam stepped back slightly. He didn't walk alongside. He didn't push his way through. This was Eliza's moment, not the moment of the one who shielded her, but the moment of the one who stood up. Eliza turned to look at Sam. Her eyes were full of unspoken words, but in the end she only nodded. Sam responded with a very slight nod. "Enough." As Eliza followed, the sheriff Sam stayed behind, watching the town fade into the dim oil lamps. He didn't see himself as a hero. He simply saw that he had done what a decent man should do: be in the right place, at the right time, and say the right thing. As Eliza stepped into the light of Redwood Crossing to speak her truth, Sam understood that the most important battle was over, not with fists or guns, but with a human being being seen as a human being. Redwood Crossing has never been entirely quiet. Even on the most ordinary evenings, this small town would still have the sound of hammers from the blacksmith shop, the clatter of wooden shoes on the pavement, the slow opening and closing of doors, a rhythm of life inhabited by people, more accustomed to work than to quarrel. But that night the atmosphere was different. Not noisier, just heavier. Eliza Moore stood in front of the police station, her hands clasped together, feeling her heartbeat. The oil lamp hanging on the porch cast a soft yellow light on her face, neither concealing nor revealing. Enough for others to see who she was, and enough for her to see where she stood. Sam Carter stood a few steps away from her. Not right next to him. No cover. But close enough that if anything happened, he would be the first to step forward. His rifle no longer hung high as it had in the log cabin. It was carried not as a threat, but as part of the reality of the frontier. At times the presence of a weapon is something to think twice about. The group of pursuers has returned. Not more numerous, not more aggressive, but they arrived with the expressions of people unaccustomed to rejection. The leader, the man who had once called Eliza his property, dismounted, his eyes fixed on her. "We're not finished yet," he said. "That girl has to go home." Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. But this time she didn't back down. Sheriff Redwood Crossing stood at the front, his voice low and slow. "We're handling this." The other man smirked. "You have no right to detain my family members." Sam took a step forward. Not fast, not strong, but enough to close the distance, not to attack but to stop. "She already said it," Sam said. "She chose to stay." The man laughed. "Choose? She doesn't know what she's choosing." Eliza heard that and stepped out. She stepped out of the relative comfort of other people's shadows, standing upright in the oil lamplight. In that moment she clearly felt all eyes on her, of the people, of the police, of those who had chased her for miles. "I know very well," Eliza said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it resonated. "I choose to go, and I won't be silent anymore." A moment of silence enveloped the small square. The man looked at her, his gaze shifting from contempt to anger. "Do you think those words will save you?" Eliza swallowed hard. But she didn't turn away. "No," she replied. "But they will save those who come after me." That remark caused a few people nearby to exchange glances. No one applauded. No one cheered. But there were very subtle nods, those who understood the value of not remaining silent in small towns like this. The man took a step forward. One of his companions placed his hand on the butt of his gun. The atmosphere became tense. Sam Carter didn't yell. He didn't draw his gun immediately either. He simply said very clearly, "Stop." No one stopped. Sam raised his gun. He wasn't aiming at the people. He was aiming at the ground right in front of the horse's hooves. Gunshots rang out, dry, sharp, and jarring in the otherwise quiet space of Redwood Crossing. Dirt flew up. The horse neighed loudly and recoiled. Everything stood still for a single breath. Sam immediately lowered his gun. He didn't move forward. He didn't threaten further. He didn't say a word after that shot. He said enough with his actions. The police chief stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "I think you should leave town." The man looked at Sam. His eyes no longer held the confidence they once did. "This isn't over yet." Sam nodded. "We'll stay here. No challenge. No boasting. Just a simple truth." The other group mounted their horses, turned, and rode away. The sound of hooves faded into the darkness, descending on the outskirts of town. There was no bloodshed. No screams. Only a threat remained, much weaker than when it had been delivered. Eliza stood still for a long time. When things calmed down, she realized her hands were trembling. Not from fear anymore, but because the tension had passed. Sam didn't approach her right away. He gave her her moment, a moment to understand that this time she couldn't be saved. She had to stand up for herself. The police chief turned to Eliza. "Would you like to come inside? We'll handle this properly." Eliza nodded. "Yes." She turned to Sam. Their eyes met in the dim light of the oil lamp. There were no lengthy thank yous. No promises. Just a glance, enough for both of them to understand that what had just happened would change her life, and perhaps the entire town, in ways no one could immediately articulate. Sam nodded slightly. "I'll wait." Eliza walked into the police office. The door closed behind her, not as a prison door, but as a new beginning where the truth would be written in ink, not in fear. Sam stood outside, watching the sky darken. He heard the familiar sounds of town life returning, slow, steady. Redwood Crossing wasn't becoming a place of epic tales. It was simply a place where the right thing to do was being done. And sometimes that's enough. As the police office door closed behind Eliza, Sam understood that from this moment on, the story was no longer about running away or confronting the enemy, but about a small community willing to listen and let justice prevail. Mornings at Redwood Crossing felt very different from anywhere Eliza Moore had ever known. There were no blaring train whistles, no hurried shouts. Only the familiar sounds of a small town waking up, the sweeping of porches, the opening and closing of wooden doors, the clatter of horse hooves on the dusty main road. The early morning sunlight streamed down the wooden roof, highlighting the wood grain that had faded with age. Redwood Crossing didn't try to appear rich or ostentatious. It was simply itself a place orderly enough for people to believe that if they spoke the truth, someone would listen. Eliza walked out of the police office with a feeling that was both familiar and strange. She was no longer a fugitive in the rainy night, but she also didn't quite know who she would become next. It felt like standing between two breaths, one of the past that had just faded away, one of a future yet to be named. The police chief kept her mother's letters, reading each one carefully. No rush. No doubt. He said it took time, witnesses, paperwork, things Eliza had never been given the authority to wait for. But this time she wasn't afraid. Because Redwood Crossing didn't push her into the spotlight. They kept her in the light. Sam Carter stood waiting across the street near the post office. He didn't approach to ask any questions. He simply nodded when he saw Eliza, a slight nod enough for her to know she didn't need to rush to tell him anything. "Eliza," the police chief said before turning back inside. "Someone wants to see you." He pointed toward the post office. "Eleanor Hayes," he said. "She's been the mail-keeper here for many years." Eliza felt her heart flutter slightly. She walked slowly toward the post office. The building was small and neat, its windows draped with white curtains that had faded with time. On the porch, an elderly woman sat on a wooden chair, knitting her back straight, her eyes gentle yet sharp. "Are you Eliza Moore?" she asked, her voice low and warm. Eliza paused. "Yes." She put down what she was doing and slowly stood up. "I am Eleanor Hayes." Eliza immediately recognized that gaze, the gaze of someone who had lived long enough to look directly at the pain of others without flinching. "Come inside," she said. "There are things we shouldn't talk about on the porch." The post office was warm and quiet inside. The wooden shelves were filled with letters, many envelopes yellowed with age but neatly arranged. The smell of old paper, ink, and wood created a unique scent, the smell of carefully preserved memories. Eleanor Hayes took a thick envelope tied with old cloth string from a drawer. "I've kept this for years," she said. "I never opened it. I never sent it out." Eliza looked at the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "It's, my mother wrote," Eleanor said, her voice softening. "She wrote that if I ever came here, it meant she wouldn't have been able to protect me." The words didn't strike Eliza like a sudden blow. They spread slowly like water seeping into dry soil. Eliza bowed her head. Tears fell silently. Eleanor offered no words of comfort. She placed her hand on the table, leaving it there, not touching Eliza but close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. "Your mother isn't weak," Eleanor said after a moment. "She's very brave." Eliza looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I wasn't there. It's not your fault," Eleanor said firmly. "There are mothers who protect their children by entrusting the truth to others when they know they don't have enough time." Eliza took a deep breath and picked up the envelope. She didn't open it immediately. She just held it gently, pressing it against her chest as if wanting to feel the lingering warmth from her mother's hand. Outside, Redwood Crossing continued its usual rhythm of life. A child ran past, giggling. A man led his horse by. No one peered into the post office with curiosity. They respected the space, a rare kind of respect Eliza had never experienced. Sam stood on the porch looking up at the pale blue sky. He didn't go inside. This wasn't his place. When Eliza stepped out, she looked at Sam. Her gaze was different from before, no longer bewildered nor merely grateful. It held a newfound stability, as if someone had just laid a new foundation for her. "She kept the letter," Eliza said softly. Sam nodded. "So it's the right person." They walked along the main road of Redwood Crossing. Eliza looked at the town with a different gaze, no longer a temporary refuge but the place that had taken on her story. She saw the older women standing in front of the shop, speaking softly. She saw the men greet Sam with a familiar nod. No one asked many questions. No one pried. Here it was understood that some pains didn't need to be exposed to be acknowledged. "You can stay here for a while," Eleanor said as she saw Eliza to the post office door. "There's a spare room behind our house." Eliza was surprised. I didn't want to bother you." Eleanor smiled. "No need to bother. It's a continuation." Those words choked Eliza up. In the afternoon, Eliza sat alone by the window of her small room behind the post office. Sunlight streamed onto the wooden table where she placed her mother's envelope. She opened it and read each carefully written line, her voice trembling slightly. Not to reopen old wounds, but to put them in their proper place. Out there, Redwood Crossing still lives, quiet, unhurried, but strong enough to hold on to those who were once abandoned. Sam Carter walked past the post office, his familiar mailbag in hand. He stopped, looked up at the window where Eliza was sitting. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just stood there for a moment, then continued on his way. He knew that in moments of revival one needs to be alone to realize that they are truly safe. And Redwood Crossing, a small town nestled in the frontier, has done something that not many places have done. It gives truth a home, and gives people the right to stand tall. As Eliza folded her mother's last letter and looked out at the small road in front of the post office, she understood that staying in Redwood Crossing wasn't just about finding refuge, it was about preparing for the moment when justice would be called in her own voice. Justice at Redwood Crossing doesn't come with loud bells or solemn pronouncements. It arrived slowly, like the morning, spreading across old wooden roofs, clear enough that no one could pretend not to see it. For several days after the confrontation in the square, the town went about as usual. People still opened their shops, still led their horses along the main street, and still greeted each other with familiar nods. But behind that facade of peace, the wheels of justice have begun to turn. Eliza Moore sat in the small room behind the post office, rereading her mother's letters one more time, not because of the pain, but because she needed to make sure she was ready. Ready for the truth to no longer be a heavy burden hidden in her chest, but something that could be placed on the table in broad daylight. The police chief came to see her one afternoon. He brought a notebook, ink, and an unadorned seriousness. Eleanor Hayes sat beside Eliza silently as a quiet anchor between two generations of women. "These letters," the police chief said, turning the pages one by one, "are not just accounts. They are testimonies." Eliza nodded. "My mother knew she didn't have much time left, and she chose not to remain silent," he said. "The investigation was not quick, but it was thorough. The timelines matched. The names in the letters were cross-referenced with business records, livestock sales contracts, and loan documents. Details that Eliza had previously only vaguely perceived now became as clear as bold ink. Sam Carter was not present at those meetings. He wasn't summoned. Nor did he come on his own accord. Every morning he still rode his horse, delivering mail to the farms around Redwood Crossing, visiting the elderly, waiting for news from their children and grandchildren, doing his job as if what had happened had nothing to do with him. And that's why people saw Sam's true role even more clearly. He wasn't the one standing in the spotlight, but the one who kept the spotlight from going out. The town was not in a commotion on the day Eliza's stepfather was arrested. There were no curious crowds, no shouting. Just two policemen on horseback arriving at the edge of town early in the morning, where the man had just arrived with the intention of talking again. He did not resist. Perhaps it was because for the first time he realized that his familiar threats no longer worked. At Redwood Crossing, no one called him boss, and no one called Eliza property. Eliza stood in the police office as they handcuffed him. She didn't move forward. She didn't move backward. She just stood there silently watching, not with hatred but with the ending. A chapter of life closed not with a gunshot but with ink signed on paper. "Do you have anything to say?" the police chief asked. Eliza shook her head. "No, she has said enough." As they led the man outside, sunlight streamed down the dirt road. Everything seemed so normal it was almost cruel, as if life went on despite what had been exposed. Sam Carter was standing in the distance near the post office. He didn't approach. No one called him. But Eliza saw him, the familiar hat, the calm posture. His gaze wasn't on the arrest, but on the sky where the clouds drifted slowly by. As Eliza walked out of the police office, several people standing nearby nodded at her. This isn't a polite greeting. It's a silent acknowledgement. We listened. And we believed. Eleanor Hayes took Eliza's hand. "You didn't have to be here today," she said. "But you chose to be." Eliza smiled softly. "I want my mother to know." She nodded. "She knows." Sam turned his back and walked ahead. No one asked him to stay. No one patted him on the shoulder or called his name. He walked toward the stables where his horse was waiting as if it were just another ordinary day. Eliza watched him go. "Isn't he staying?" she asked. The police chief looked at Sam for a moment, then said, "There are people who do their job and then step back. That's how they live." Eliza understood. That evening the town lit up early. There was no celebration, no speeches, just a normal dinner in the small kitchens where people told each other about their day and perhaps for the first time mentioned how a girl had chosen to speak the truth and been heard. Eliza sat by the window of her room, the oil lamp casting a shadow on the wall. She took out her mother's last letter and reread a short passage. "If you can read these words in the light, it means you have come far enough to no longer be afraid." Tears fell, but they didn't smudge the words. Outside, Sam Carter led his horse along the main road. A man greeted him. He nodded in return. No one spoke of what he had done, and Sam said nothing. He knew that the best thing he could do for Eliza at this moment was not to stay by her side, but to let her stand alone in safety. Justice has been served, not with gunfire, not with blood, but with truth, patience, and people who choose not to turn their backs. When justice has been served, and the truth no longer needs to be protected by fear, Eliza begins to realize that the hardest thing is not running away or confronting the truth, but learning to stay and build a new life from the simplest things. A few months later, Redwood Crossing entered autumn. Not the vibrant autumn depicted in paintings hanging in the living rooms of affluent families in the East, but a simple autumn with muted colors and softer light. Leaves turn pale yellow, then brown, falling slowly onto the dirt roads. The wind carries the dry scent of old grass and the familiar smell of wood smoke. Eliza Moore was used to that pace of life. In the mornings, she would get up early and help Eleanor Hayes sort the mail at the post office. The work was regular, not much talk, but meaningful. Each envelope was placed in the correct compartment, each name called by the correct name, as if every tiny piece of the world were being kept neatly organized. At lunchtime, she would walk back to her small room behind the post office and cook a simple meal. Sometimes it was vegetable soup, sometimes just bread and hot tea. Nothing fancy, but warm enough. In the afternoons, she would sit by the window, sewing, reading, or simply watching the sparse stream of people passing along the main road of Redwood Crossing. No more wary glances, no more feeling like a stranger. Eliza chose to stay. It wasn't because this place was perfect. It was because this place gave her the right to stay without being asked why, without being asked to prove anything further. Sam Carter continued delivering mail. He passed through Redwood Crossing several times a week, then turned onto the smaller roads, leading to distant farms. Old men and women would still stand on their porches waiting for him. Children would still run alongside his horse for a short distance, laughing loudly. Sam's life didn't change much. Only one thing is different. He has a place to return to. Not in the sense of ownership. Not his own house. But a place where, upon returning, he doesn't need to explain where he's been, what he's seen, or what stories he's brought back. In the evenings, Sam often stopped by the post office. He didn't always talk. Sometimes he'd just sit there sipping a cup of tea Eleanor had made, listening to the rustling of paper and Eliza quietly reading the mailing list. There were no promises between them. There were no vows. There were no promises of forever. Only consistent presence, something those who have been hurt understand the value of more than any flowery words is truly valuable. One late afternoon, as the wind began to pick up, the western sky darkened. Eliza stood on the post office porch watching the gray clouds gather. A storm was coming, not violent, but enough to change the air. The wind swept through the town, carrying the familiar smell of rain. Sam had just finished tying up his horse and stepped onto the porch. "It's going to rain," he said. Eliza nodded. Probably. They stood next to each other without touching. The wind blew harder, making Eliza's dress flutter. She felt an old reflex resurface. Her heart rate quickened, her breathing became more rapid. But then she realized here she was standing, in the middle of a town illuminated by lights, beside a man who demanded nothing. She took a deep breath. Her heart rate slowed. "Sam," Eliza said softly. He turned to look at her. "For the first time," she continued, "I'm no longer afraid when a storm comes." The statement didn't sound like a declaration. It was more like a truth that had finally been accepted, needless to prove, needless to explain. Sam looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "That's enough," he said. The rain began to fall gently, steadily. The first drops touched the wooden eaves, creating a low, rhythmic sound. Redwood Crossing slowly sank into the rain as if accustomed to being washed clean and then standing firm again. They went inside. Eleanor had already lit the fireplace. The fire was small but warm. Eliza hung up her coat and poured some tea. Sam took off his hat and sat down in his usual chair near the fireplace. Nobody talks about the past. No one brings up the days of fleeing, the rainy nights, the confrontations. Not because they've forgotten, but because those things have been put in their proper place. The past is no longer a shadow to chase. It has become the ground to stand on. A few weeks later, Sam repaired the fence behind the post office. Eliza helped him hold the nails. No one called it living together. No one gave the relationship a name. But when Sam left town for a few days, Eliza left an oil lamp lit by the window. When he returned, the lamp was still there. Not a promise, just a sign. Winter arrived slowly. Snow fell lightly on Redwood Crossing, not thick but white enough to make everything quieter. Eliza wrapped her scarf around herself and stepped outside each morning, breathing in the cold air, feeling distinctly alive, not hiding, not running away. Sam delivered the mail on a morning when the snow was falling heavier than usual. He knocked on the post office door, smiling slightly when Eliza opened it. "I think I'll stay tonight," he said. "The road is slippery." Eliza nodded. "Stay." Just 2 words. But they carry the peace of a home that was chosen, not forced upon anyone. That night the wind blew fiercely. Snow lashed against the windows. But inside, the fireplace burned steadily. Eliza sat reading her mother's old letters, no more pain, only memories. Sam sat down to rearrange his mailbag. No one is holding anyone's hand. No one needs to. Their love, if it can be named, didn't come like a whirlwind. It came season after season, day after day, through small, unassuming acts. And when the wind outside howled, Eliza no longer recoiled. She looked at the fire. She looked at the room. She looked at the life she was living. She was no longer afraid. In that harsh frontier region, amidst wind, rain, and irreparable loss, Eliza and Sam learned a simple lesson. Love is not magic. It is the courage to continue living decently, and to stay even when the storm rages. The story of Eliza Moore and Sam Carter is more than just a Western love story. It's a quiet mirror reflecting the very real questions in our lives today. Beliefs cannot be forced. Eliza was not saved. She was respected. And it was that respect that gave her the strength to stand tall, speak the truth, and choose her own life. A good man doesn't need to be celebrated. Sam Carter wasn't in the spotlight. He was in the right place. In real life, the most trustworthy people are often those who don't need to be called heroes. Justice isn't always loud and boisterous. Sometimes justice comes through an old letter, a community willing to listen, and a woman who dares to say, "I will not remain silent any longer." Mature love needs no vows. It's present in staying when you can leave, in lighting a lamp for the other person, letting them know they're not alone. If you're at an age where the past outweighs the future, if you've ever lost faith, felt afraid, thought it was too late to start over, then this story is for you. Thank you for listening until this point. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling healing stories, slow, authentic, and full of humanity. Because it's never too late to believe again.